Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different and talk about some more modern games. I feel like people that know me from Twitch especially, and this channel as well, probably assume I don't play a lot of modern games, and that would be a safe assumption considering I mainly stream retro games over on Twitch. I mostly talk about retro games, but I am a game fan through and through. I like all sorts of games, regardless of platform, regardless of release date, and I do try to go out of my way, at least occasionally over on Twitch, to play some of the newer games that I think would interest others as well as myself, games I'm hyped for, games that I think would be interesting to showcase. I've streamed actually over 50 games that have come out since 2020, and I have a little stack here of games that I have absolutely adored and loved. Shit. I just want to talk about them because I think a lot of these deserve some extra attention. They are games that I have absolutely massively enjoyed. I know we have plenty of the decade left, but I figured it'd be fun to take a look at games in the past few years that I think are absolutely phenomenal. So let's get into it. And to start here, I do have a couple of digital games, and we're starting with one, and I'm gonna go ahead and hold up the DualSense because it is the game that came with the PlayStation 5, Astro's Playroom. This came out in November of 2020. We're gonna go in chronological order here for this video. Unfortunately, I did not get to play it right on launch in November of 2020 because I, like many, was not able to get my PlayStation 5 right away. In fact, I had to wait till about June of 2022 to finally secure one. Despite the wait, honestly, totally worth it. Astro's Playroom is a great use of the DualSense, uses a lot of the functionality in this controller incredibly well. Still, I would argue better than just about most games that come out on the platform. It seems like third-party developers don't really try and push certain software and hardware capabilities of the platforms, especially if it's a multi-platform release. A lot of these DualSense specific features don't get utilized super well, but Astro's Playroom is a great showcase for it. I hesitate to say tech demo. I feel like some people would want to call it that, but I think that absolutely undersells how great of a 3D platforming experience this game was. Yes, is it a little short? Sure, but honestly, I was personally totally fine with the length. I think if you really want to get every last drop out of it, you're going to go for the platinum trophy anyway, and that will take you, 5 or 6 hours, which I thought was a perfect amount of time for this. It is just so trimmed of any sort of fat. The pacing is phenomenal. The platforming, of course, the basic core mechanics are just chef's kiss. One of the best 3D platformers I think has come out in recent years. I'm really excited, needless to say, for the new Astrobot game that is coming later in the year. Totally looking forward to it. I think it was a great pack-in for Sony to include the PS5, and it was a great first experience for the console for me. And speaking of platformers, we have another one for number 2, and that is Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. It was absolutely about time for this game to come out when it did. Finally, we got a proper Crash 4. TWAC fans, sorry, but they named it the 4th Crash for a reason. This absolutely deserved the title. You'll notice I have the Switch version here. The Switch version launched in March of 2021. I believe there were versions that came out earlier. At the time, I didn't really have any other platform that it was on, and so I picked up the Switch version, and I think people would assume that this version would be quite a downgrade from a lot of the other ones. I love how they approached releasing this game on the Switch. You pretty much get the same core Crash 4 experience, but obviously visuals are going to take a hit. It's on a weaker platform, but they actually went from basically the ground up and redesigned a lot of the visual assets in this game, made some more cartoony, lower poly models to basically optimize the Switch version as much as they possibly could. And while there might be some slight performance hiccups here and there, I found this extremely playable, and such love and care going into a Switch port like this, I feel like is so rare. There are a couple other exceptions out there, but this to me is like a shining example of how to do a Switch port right. And like I said, the core gameplay is there. It's great. If you're into 3D platforming, Crash 4 is a must. This game also doesn't pull back any punches in terms of difficulty. I think some people were worried about that. Seeing a more modern Crash game in the 2020s get released, we were worried that it was going to be maybe a little bit more normie. I am here to say, this game is quite difficult at times still, and especially if you want to go for more of the relics and the time trials and things like that. Like, it's going to kick your butt repeatedly. It's great. It's fantastic, but it's also very accessible if you just want to do main campaign, right? It's still going to test you a bit, but I think it's a perfect level of difficulty. Again, another great example of a 3D platformer to come out at this time. Honestly, it's great to see some phenomenal 3D platformers come out in the last few years, because for a while there, it seemed like it was kind of a dying art. And so I'm so glad that we're getting more of these. And you might argue this next one is a bit of a cheat, since technically it's an arcade port and the arcade version came out in 2017, but I'm gonna count it because the home console version that we can all get access to, the one we can buy, came out in 2021, and that is Cruis'n Blast. Of course, part of the classic Cruis'n franchise of just great fun arcade racing. Super big in the mid to late 90s with Cruis'n USA, which got an arcade version and then came over to the N64. And they continued that trend with World and Exotica. After Exotica, this franchise kind of lay dormant for many, many years until we got this one here. Honestly, worth the wait. This game takes the Cruis'n formula, really just modernizes it for a newer audience and ups the visual fidelity and honestly wackiness. This game looks wild. I don't think you've ever seen anything quite like it. It takes the zaniness up to like 11. There's some crazy fun vehicles in this, lots of bright colors, neon. This game has a visual style, and admittedly it is very loud. It's not going to be for everybody, but I personally loved every second of it. I think it epitomizes what a fun, fast-paced arcade racer is all about, and so I can't recommend this game enough. It's very cheap now. The Switch version is the only version you can get. It hasn't come over to other consoles, so it is locked to the Switch and the arcades. I'm not going to say it's a Switch system seller, but you know, your mileage may vary. I personally absolutely love arcade racers, so this is one of my favorite games on the platform, and I hope this game did well. I don't know how it did sales-wise. There were murmurings of getting multiplayer support added to this, and I think that kind of fell through, so I don't know how this did for the publishers here. I would hope it did well, and I would also personally love to see them take the older Cruis'n games, USA, World, Exotica, and get some kind of modern Switch collection. I think that'd be incredible. If we could get all the arcade versions and the N64 home ports all in one package, I would buy that shit up, no problem. I can't recommend these games enough, and Blast is a super worthy entry and an overall great franchise. And I really don't mean to keep putting games of the same genre back to back, but that's just how the dice have fallen here. That's how this is working out. And the reason I mention that for this is because this actually came out in the same month as Cruis'n Blast, and it was one of the reasons that I put off buying this game, and I kind of regret that to a degree. I kind of don't, because it allowed me to wait and get the PS5 version, but that is Hot Wheels Unleashed. And I think another reason that I put this one off for a while is the fact that it is a Hot Wheels game. You know, I don't mean that as a slight against the IP. I personally love Hot Wheels. I grew up with Hot Wheels. I played some of the games growing up. Let's be honest, guys, like the video game canon for this franchise has not been all that great in terms of its track record, right? A lot of the older games, even though maybe they were a little fun, usually they were very short. Usually they were pretty easy. You know, maybe they had some fun like little turbo mechanics, but nothing really special. A lot of them did kind of feel like blatant cash grabs. But I want to say, if you're thinking about buying this game, take every preconceived notion you have about Hot Wheels games and throw them out the window. Honestly, its presentation is super faithful. The die-cast cars are replicated extremely well in this game, and a lot of the tracks have a lot of the fun original toys that came with a lot of the Hot Wheels sets. You know, you get the ramps and the boosters and all that kind of fun stuff. Does that incredibly well, but underneath the hood, the core racing mechanics in this are honestly some of the best that I have played in a long time, and I am not exaggerating. This game will absolutely blow you away in terms of just the basic handling, as well as the drifting and boosting mechanics, which are different depending on the car that you decide to use. And the difficulty here is actually quite high at times. Even as somebody that plays racing games often like I do, I found this game quite difficult at certain times. I had to redo a lot of races quite a few times to actually get the first place victory. Honestly, it was really refreshing to see Hot Wheels get such a high quality, high caliber game. And I'm so glad, even if it took as long as it did to get to this point, I'm glad we finally got there. And I definitely want to check out the sequel now that I've finished this one. I don't want to put that one off too long because I've learned my lesson. These games are some of the best racing games you'll probably find on the market today. I'm seriously mean that. This next game launched on PS5 in July of 2022, and that is Stray. Now, I'm sure if you have been paying attention to video games in the last few years, this one got hyped up quite a bit. Honestly, I think this game lived up to every bit of that. I know not everybody quite feels that same way, but personally, this to me was an absolute breath of fresh air. I honestly don't play many adventure games anymore, and a lot of the reason for that is so many of them nowadays feel so bloated. They are so focused on trying to increase player playtime, absolutely stuff things to the brim with radiant and redundant and frankly boring quests, tons of dialogue and exposition, all that filler. This has absolutely none of that. Not only is this just a wonderful little adventure game, it'll take you about 5 hours to beat, but what is chalked into those 5 hours is just absolute bliss, perfect pacing. I mean, come on, you get to play as a cat. Like, I mean, really, what could I possibly say that hasn't already been said about Stray? I personally think overall, I was ready for a game like this to come out because, like I said, I'm just so done with these giant 50+ hour action adventure experiences that try to be AAA and just, so many of them are so overblown and it just doesn't need to be that way. We can get these little bite-sized experiences that still feel super high quality, super polished, right? I don't think anyone's gonna tell you that this game looks bad. It is a gorgeous game. I think we need more games like this in the modern era. I think there is plenty of space in the industry for games like this. Stray is a shining example in my opinion, and I hope more developers and publishers take notice of this game's success and run with similar ideas like this, because I'd love to see more games like this. And next up is one that I am really glad to showcase. This might be the least well-known of the games so far in this list. This is yet again a 3D platformer. I'm actually a little surprised how many 3D platformers have made it onto my top 10, because usually it's a genre that I'm pretty picky about. So that says a lot to the games that have made it here. And this next one here is Frogun, or Frogun. I've heard it pronounced both ways. This is a 3D platformer that really is a love letter to the 5th gen 3D platformers of the time. You know, games like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, maybe some of the more obscure ones like Jersey Devil on the PS1. It takes basically that feel, that art style, and gives it a nice HD coat of paint, brings it into the modern era in such a fresh and innovative way. And the reason it's called Frogun is because you get your gun, which is a frog, and it shoots out a tongue, and it makes for such a fun way to traverse levels, get around platforms, bridge gaps, things of that nature. It's such a unique gameplay mechanic, and to me, it absolutely distills what made the creative platforming in the 5th gen phenomenal. And I think this is an absolute great love letter to games of that era, but it also manages to set itself apart enough. You know, it wears its influences on its sleeve, but it doesn't just become those influences and mimic those influences. I think it really does its own thing super well. Great level design, some really fun bosses in here. They're pretty simple. Nothing's gonna be like too crazy challenging. Overall, just a lovely little tribute to really the golden age of 3D platformers, and it honestly stands up with some of the best of the best. I can't recommend Frogun enough. And this next one is actually a 2D platformer, and it's one that we're gonna have to put in post here because I don't have any box art or anything for it, because it came out on Steam in early 2023, and that is Pizza Tower. Now, I want to give a shout out to a viewer of my Twitch streams, Monica Blair. Thank you for gifting this game to me and asking for me to play it, because honestly, I'm not sure it would have been one that I would have gotten around to myself without some sort of prodding or, you know, some sort of just gentle nudging along, because typically, again, platformers, 3D platformers, as well as 2D platformers, I tend to be pretty picky about. So I wasn't necessarily like looking for a game like this. So to have it recommended to me was awesome. This game blew me away. A lot of people have been comparing it to Wario Land, and I think it definitely does take the Wario Land formula and really, really latch onto it. But also, again, it makes it its own, like Frogun. I think it's lovely to see indie devs put together games like this. Honestly, the art style is one of the first things you'll notice about this game. It is absolutely wild in terms of its visuals. I think it's great, though. It looks so lovingly handcrafted, despite all the craziness goofiness and zaniness. Not only that, but the mechanics clearly were worked on incredibly well for a long time and really fine-tuned, because this is one of the best 2D platformers, one of the most satisfying 2D platformers that I've played in a very, very, very long time. And that's saying something, considering the long lineage that 2D platforming has had since basically Super Mario Brothers. This stands among some of the best, I honestly believe. It is one worth checking out 100% if you are into the 2D platforming genre in any sense of the word. Check out Pizza Tower. It's an incredible time and very difficult as well, but it's a lovingly challenging game and super satisfying. Now, this next one actually came out the day right after Pizza Tower, so we were eating pretty good in January of last year. That is the remake of the fantastic Dead Space. I'm sure some will debate that this doesn't deserve to be in a 2020s game list because it's a remake of a game from 2008, but this is so well done that I could not possibly pass up talking about it. That is not to say that the 2008 game is not incredible in its own right. It absolutely is. I played it around the time of release and I loved it back then, but this game takes the feeling that I had in 2008 playing that and modernizes it for the modern age and makes it feel super fresh once again. Visually, this game is a freaking masterclass. It is one of the most gorgeous games that I've ever played in my life. Obviously, it's a little ironic that I say that because of all the gore and just nastiness that inhabits the world of Dead Space. Phenomenally good looking video game. I was constantly floored by just the sheer attention to detail and the level of fidelity they were able to get out of this remake. That being said, it is a remake, of course. It plays a lot in the same way that the 2008 version did, but there are quality of life improvements. It does play noticeably better than the original, which you would hope for, right? This is pretty much the best case scenario I think you can get for a remake. It takes everything that made the original great. It is mostly pretty faithful, but you get a huge graphical boost. You get a great gameplay and quality of life boost. Otherwise, it is the same experience that we know and love. It was like playing the game for the first time again, which is such a rare feeling. And to be able to get that with not only one of my favorite horror games ever, but also one of my favorite third-person shooters ever was an absolute dream come true. Worth every penny. I bought this right on launch and it was absolutely worth it. And this next one, guys, is a fighting game. And admittedly, I haven't gotten to play a lot of the fighting games that have come out in the recent years because if you don't know, actually, I feel like probably a lot of people wouldn't assume this considering how often I talk about fighting games and how often I stream them, but I actually never played fighting games growing up. I mean, like I played a couple here and there at friends' houses or at arcades, but I never owned any. I really didn't get into them until I started streaming. I've since really fallen in love with them. They're great for the stream format and also they're just fun to jump into and mess around in. I've been playing catch up in the last few years on my streams, trying to play these fighting games that I have missed out on over the years. The game featured here for this video today is Street Fighter 6. This game, just wow. Absolutely wow. I have been floored by the few recent fighting games I have played. Just the sheer amount of content, the presentation, the level of fidelity, the low barrier of entry, relatively speaking, compared to especially a lot of like the early fighting games of the early 3D era compared to what we have now. It's incredible how easy it is to jump into a lot of these games, but also how high the skill ceiling still is if you really want to get good at these. And I think that is absolutely where fighting games shine nowadays, and this game is absolutely no exception. It's probably one of the best in that case. You can jump into this, you can play single player. You know, I've only admittedly played this single player. I don't pay for online services, so for me on console, I'm just gonna play the single player experience, whatever it's got there. This game has an incredible quest mode that I've heard nothing but good things about. I haven't really gotten to dive too deep into it myself. I'm mainly judging this just based off of the arcade single player mode, and to me, that was so strong that it deserved a spot on this list. This is an absolute joy of a fighting game, and like I said, I'm no fighting game expert, but being able to jump into it, have options for basic controls. I personally tend to go for the classic controls or the more advanced controls where you have all the 6 buttons. I don't claim to be some great fighting game expert, but I know enough to get around, and this game, such a joy to play, and I loved every second of it. Honestly, I kind of want to go back and play through with some more of the characters here. I played through with probably at least a half dozen of the different characters. Just an absolute great entry in the franchise. I know the art style is a little bit of a point of contention. Personally, I liked the fact that it looked quite a bit bit different. I think it sets itself apart. It pushes the franchise in a new direction, and I think this is a absolutely phenomenal fighting game, one of the best in the last couple years. So glad I got the chance to play it. And last but certainly not least, and I really want to stress certainly, this is going to be the last game we cover, and it is the most recent. It came out in November of last year, 2023. I do have a lot to say, and I hope you'll indulge me, because I think especially if you've been on the fence about this game, you deserve to hear what I'm about to say. I loved this game so much that I picked it up on launch day, the moment it released. I played it for like 9 or 10 hours, streamed all of it, went to bed, got back up, ate a quick meal, streamed about 5 more hours to finish it off, because I just wanted to get so much of this game. I wanted all of it like as soon as I possibly could, and that is RoboCop Rogue City. Obviously, I don't need to explain the RoboCop franchise to you. If you're not aware, it's an excellent sci-fi film, the first one. It has been a franchise, you know, there have been multiple entries. This actually takes place in between RoboCop 2 and 3, which I think was a perfect move. Obviously, the first movie is pretty universally praised. The second one had a bit more of a mixed response. I personally really find it interesting. It's a bit of an off-kilter sequel, but I liked it for that. And 3 is pretty universally considered the worst. It was taking more of a PG-13 slant, trying to appeal to kids, and really felt like it was trying to sell toys more than anything, so the story kind of fell by the wayside. Placing this where these devs did, between 2 and 3, basically picking up the story where 2 left off, I think was a perfect choice, and it pretty much means that we got the proper RoboCop 3, right, the one we deserved, as a video game, which is so incredible. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I think personally, and again, if you've been holding off on this game, hopefully this will convince you, I think this is the best movie licensed game ever made in terms of building the filmic world of this franchise and allowing the player to explore it, traverse it, work through it, and then also affect it. I've never played anything so immersive. I was getting constant deja vu, and I was constantly just like, I can't believe that I'm playing it. It literally feels like I'm playing a movie, and I've never had that feeling before. It was so magical. Like, I can't help but radiate about this game. It is a first-person shooter. It is by the same devs that did Terminator Resistance, so obviously from a gameplay perspective, this is pretty solid. These devs know what they're doing in the shooter space. I personally thought the gameplay was really great, but I don't want to oversell it. I think if I had to rate the gameplay, I'd probably give it like a solid 8.5 out of 10 in terms of shooter mechanics. I think it's more than competent. I would say it's great in terms of gameplay, but it is not like outstanding 10 out of 10. The bulk of my praise for this is gonna just come from the fact that it was magical to play in this game's world. But that is not to say the gameplay is bad by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it kind of rekindled my love for first-person shooters, which is a genre that I have felt burned and uninterested in for a very long time. Growing up with the 360 and the OG Xbox, especially my adolescent years in the 360, it felt like all I was playing was shooters for a while. So it was really refreshing to play one that actually kind of reinvigorated my love for it. And I think part of the reason that it did that is because of the way it actually uses weapons. You do get the Auto 9, the classic gun from the film, and you're able to upgrade that throughout the course of the game. I really like the way that that works, but I even more so like the way it treats secondary weapons. In fact, really the way you get other weapons is either in the environment or picking them off from enemies, and basically it treats those guns like one-time use items. You get limited ammo, and then once you deplete it, you're back to the Auto 9, which honestly adds a level of strategy that I haven't felt in a shooter in a long time, and it made me really think out certain situations, like, do I want to use this gun at this moment, or do I want to save it for a little bit later to maybe deal some extra damage once I get swarmed with some more enemies? It just added an extra layer of thought that I haven't felt a long time in shooters. A lot of them feel just like galleries, and this does not feel like that at all. But again, do not expect stellar 10 out of 10 best shooter you've ever played. I am just saying this is a game that is honestly more than the sum of its parts. Overall, the story I think is really great. Again, it really is like the third film that we deserved and just never got until now. But I do feel like the main antagonist, or at least one of the main antagonists, did feel a little cookie cutter and maybe a little underdeveloped. I felt like they weren't necessarily the most interesting villain, especially when you consider the villains in the first 2 movies. I mean, those are some just hard to forget characters, right? And I felt like this didn't quite have have the same level of like crazy memorable antagonist. That being said, there are still some great moments throughout this story. There are some incredible plot twists. There's at least 2 major ones that I don't want to spoil, but absolutely had me on the edge of my seat. Really, I'm just nitpicking at this point. Overall, this is absolutely a must play. I think if you're at all a fan of the franchise, this is one that you should not pass up. And if you've been on the fence, hopefully I convinced you just to feel that experience of getting to be in the world of a movie and play it so immersively. I will cherish this experience for probably the rest of my life. And I know that sounds really over the top, but it seriously meant that much to me. Like, there were moments where I got really emotional playing this just because it's like a childhood dream come true. So can't recommend this game at all enough, but hopefully that gave you an idea. So that's going to do it for today, guys. Those are the top 10 games I think that have come out since 2020, at least that I've played. Of course, there's plenty more that I haven't gotten to experience, or maybe games that aren't quite my cup of tea. Please let me know what you guys have played in the last handful of years that really took you by surprise, or you just absolutely loved or spent tons of time in. I would love to hear what you guys have been playing. Until next time though, guys, thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing, liking, commenting, all that good stuff. See ya very soon. I just want to talk about them because I think a lot of these deserve some extra attention.